So why do they call it a smartphone when it makes me do such dumb things? Today we discuss that topic on Finding Traction. Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, today, before we get into our discussion around smartphones, let me just say that, again, I'd love to connect with guys. My email is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. And whether or not you're looking for individual coaching around walking away from porn, or whether you want to get connected with a group of guys, I've got a variety of different groups that meet throughout the week. And we've got guys from Australia, guys from the UK, guys from Canada and the US. And it's funny, I listen to podcasts and, they say where some of the people are listening to. And I get some people from Asia and Africa. But to this point, we have not yet had anybody in our groups in those from those locales. So again, love to connect with you and also encourage you just to pass this podcast on to friends you have that you think might be struggling or could use it. Again, Finding Traction. And I'd love to hear from guys or have you put a report up or just some kind of review. It would just sure help in terms of helping more guys find the podcast. So let's talk smartphones. Or are they dumb phones? Every family's got their own little sayings. I don't know. We have a saying in the Tomke family that is just D-U-B, dumb. It's not even spelled right. It's just D-U-B, dumb. That's what it's just a Tomke saying that I don't know, we coined and my kids sometimes use it, I hope. But there you go. And because sometimes smartphones make us do D-U-B, dumb things, with, our lives. And I think smartphones, where they came in, what was it, early 2000s or, and it really has changed the complexity of guys struggling with porn. Before the 2000s, we had the advent of dial-up, and that was really the first real change. And then we had, went from dial-up to high speed. And then the last big change that has really sort of accelerated guys' struggles has been the advent of the smartphone. And if you know anything about just guys who've studied these areas around porn, there's the three big A's. A is for affordability, A is for anonymity, and A is for accessibility. And of course, the internet made porn far more affordable. It made it far more, in terms of anonymous. You learn to hide your history or a few different things. Although realizing that anything you do online, hopefully by this time we realize nothing is truly secret. But the big thing that I think smartphones really changed is the whole area of accessibility. Even now, if you're sitting and you're at work, and by the way, I heard some crazy stat that the majority of porn usage happens between 9 and 5, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So there's a whole lot of looking at porn at work for people who have a computer access. But you think about it, when you're on a computer, when you're certainly on a desktop, you are at one location. But now the minute you have a phone that goes around with you, all you need is essentially, access to Wi-Fi or access to any number of high-tech situations. Then, 5G networks, your porn is wherever you go. It is this smart/DUB dumb thing in your pocket that is with you wherever you go. And so I just have recognized One of the questions I ask once we get around some of the early questions of tell me about your relationship with porn and tell me why you want to, usher porn from your life. When we get into more detailed, in our finding traction groups, I think it's lesson 4. We ask the very practical question, well, tell me what is the technology that you use to, access porn? And the vast majority of guys who respond to me all say, well, it's my smartphone, over and over and over again. And so obviously we're having to deal with something which is tripping up so many guys. So I wanted to do a specific podcast that gives some tools, some tricks around smartphone usage. Now, a number of the specific tips that I give you have to do specifically with Apple phones. I have an Apple, and so I recognize that if you have an Android or something different, you're going to have to make some translations in your mind. But even though, don't tune out even if you don't have an Apple, because here there will be a number of things that will apply to all phones. So anyways, so having said that, here is the very first thing that I would it's a phrase that I heard from a new friend of mine, Mark Denning, who has written a book about porn usage. And he has this great phrase. He says, if you're 95% in, you're 100% out. And what he means by that is if you're not willing to do what it takes and you're leaving a back door, you're leaving a just in case, you're 100% out of recovery. You are going to be unsuccessful. So I wanted to throw that out at the beginning because I guarantee you, as you hear some of these possibilities, you are going to be trying to find back doors, ways of maybe disqualifying or saying, well, that doesn't work, that I couldn't do that, or that wouldn't work for me, or, well, I can't do that, or I can't do that. And if that is kind of your overall posture, I would go as far as to say you are most likely not going to be successful in recovery because you're 95% in. So having said that, if, for example, you have an Apple phone, an iPhone, one of the very first things that you need to do is you need to come to understand screen time. Screen time, and I would say I recommend Apples because they give me the most control, as I share some of these, the most control over my smartphone usage. So screen time is something that you use, and you have to punch in like a 4-digit password to make it operable. Now, right there, some of you are going to go, well, there's a problem because I don't have somebody close in my life who I can work with. Well, there's your first excuse, and I would say where there's a will, there's a way. I've got guys, single guys, or guys that for one reason or another, their wives aren't on board with them in this, who will call me up and say, hey, Vern, they're from my town. And I'll just meet them and I'll quickly update or go on their, punch in the password that I have for their phone so that they can update apps or they can do some things. But you can find somebody. If we can send people to the moon, you can find somebody in your city who you can trust in this area, right? So number one is you have password. You use a password, you put a 4-digit password on screen time, and then you now have the beginnings of some control over your smartphone. Now, with screen time, you can do a number of things. First thing, and I'm just going to give a few options here. Let's start with the mild version. I know guys who are pretty good with social media. Let's say it's YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, whatever. It's part of their job or something they use, but they also recognize that this could be a problem. So what you can do with screen time is you can set, I know guys that set 10 minutes a day on Facebook, or 10 minutes a day on YouTube. And they're saying to me, Vern, if I go on and I'm on there for 10 minutes, I can check out my family. I can do that. It's when I'm on there too long, that's when I start getting bored and start scrolling around. So that's an option. But if you're, I've kind of just given you it out. But now if you are early in recovery, that's not, and you have had a problem with social media, I would say that's probably not going to serve you, because you will eventually start scrolling through and looking for arousing material. So for many of the guys early on, what I suggest they do is all problematic apps come off their smartphone. No YouTube, no Instagram, no Twitter, no Facebook. All of those things come off their phone. And it's simple to do. You just remove those apps from your phone. Second thing, and this is absolutely key, you remove your ability to add apps. Okay? Because if you can just go on and add an app whenever you want, then that is, of course, a problem. So what you do, a Google app or some, an app that is a problem, you can't go on and add an app, and it's very specific. You remove the ability to add apps. Now, if you ever need to go back and update your apps, which you'll need to do occasionally, you'll have to go back to your app store. See, when you remove the ability to add apps, it takes the app store off your phone. And what happens is you can't get at it. So you can't put apps back on. And I would say this, any app which causes problems. One of the things I hear from guys is all of a sudden I was using this app and all of a sudden I realized I had a backdoor to a browser or a backdoor to some sort of porn. And then it's like, okay, well, then that app comes off your phone. So remove problematic apps and remove the ability to add apps without specifically punching in the password and putting the app store back on temporarily to do that. I will say this, I've noticed this with myself. Occasionally, I don't have app store on my iPhone, and occasionally I'll notice there's an app that needs to be updated. Now I can't do that because I can't go on my app store. So I'll go to my wife and I'll get her to punch in my 4-letter passcode to screen time, and I'll update my apps, and immediately there's that reptile brain that's part of me. It happens every time, guys. It says, maybe we'll just leave the app store on. I think I'll be okay. And I go, no, Vern, you will not be okay. The app store needs to come back off. So every time I do it, I have to make that choice again to make those steps. So let me do that. Let me also say another thing with screen time that you need to do is you need to punch in, you need to set your ratings for things like podcasts or anything else. So what happens is, and the only, because I obviously listen to podcasts, I do podcasts, the only podcast app that I find safe is the purple Apple podcast app. Because when I'm using that podcast app, then it goes under the restrictions that I've set up in my levels of parental levels under screen time. So for me, my podcast app is also safe. So those are just some things that I would start by saying that for me are just common sense. If I was not prepared to do any of those things, I know I would be unsuccessful over the longer term. Again, remember Mark's comment, 95% in means 100% out. Now, on top of that, I also have Covenant Eyes that's on my smartphone. Now, this would also apply if you've got an Android phone as well. But for me, I have Covenant Eyes on. It's funny. I never find Covenant Eyes works as well on mobile devices as well as it does on my laptop. But having said that, they've come a long way. they used to have this really horrible, sucky web browser that you had to use, the Covenant Eyes web browser, and it was horrible. So they'll probably never want me to be a partner with them. But I will say this, they have gotten a lot better. And now what they have recently is you now can use Safari as your web browser, and that now runs through Covenant Eyes. So for me, that's been a big adjustment. That's been a big help as part of it. So those are a few things. Let's keep going. I want to ask you a question. Tell me about your bedtime etiquette, and let me say what I mean by that. I'm talking to guys, and oftentimes what I'll hear is, well, I was lying in bed and I couldn't sleep, or I woke up at 2 a.m. And guess what they did? Yes, you're right. They reach for their smartphone. And of course, now they're looking at the sort of light which is causing their brain to wake up. Bad thing. First of all, looking at any screen time thing such as a smartphone is the last thing you want to do when you're trying to go to sleep, or the last thing you do when you wake up and you can't get back to sleep. But guys will do that. They're bored, and because it's simply within easy reach, what they'll do is they'll begin to scroll or check messages or go on social media. And of course, you know the end result. It's just bad bedtime etiquette. So, well, guys go, well, I need my phone because I use my alarm. Now this is where the old fart in me goes. Believe it or not, I think they actually developed these things called alarm clocks that are not on your smartphone. They used to have maps too, by the way, but but you could actually go to your local electronics store, and probably for $20 you can buy an alarm clock that works great, that doesn't need your phone, right? So you say, well, what do I do with my phone? Well, how about turn it off? How about leave it in another room? But I couldn't do that because, well, what happens if there's an emergency call? The Cowboys, need a backup quarterback, and they're, floundering around, or your team, and they need you to go in and start. What happens if my kids call me? What happens if there's an emergency? What happens if I have a job that I have to be on call? I need to have my phone next to me in case I get an emergency call. Oh, well, there we're stuck again. I guess I have to have my phone on me. Guys, where there's a will, there's a way. I had a fun story. It just goes to show you, if you're going to be successful in recovery, you've got to be creative. So here's an example. You know what baby monitors are? Of course you do if you have a baby, because especially first-time parents are, far more worried about their kids than second or third-time parents. But, you're worried that your kid is going to cry in the middle of the night or something's going to happen. So oftentimes you have a baby monitor, and you have a baby monitor there, and then you have the other half of the monitor beside your bed. Well, here's an idea. What if you left your phone in another room of the house, like the kitchen, next to a baby monitor? So if your phone actually went off in the middle of the night from that, you would actually hear it on your baby monitor. But your phone wouldn't be next to you. See? Creativity. It's necessary for recovery. By the way, if you've ever, I noticed this because I coach guys in all different countries of the world, and they're all different time zones. I've learned, by having my wife give me a few sharp nudges. When the phone goes off at 3 a.m. because somebody in Australia decided to text me, they forgot that there was a time change. I've learned that that's, not good bedtime etiquette either. So on my smartphone, I have favorites. So then my favorites are my wife, and I have my kids on my favorites. And between like 10 and 6 in the morning, nothing, there's no ringing of any sort except if you're on my favorites. So if my daughter called me or my kids called me. So even there, I'm fine again. and don't have to worry about it. Where there's a will, there's a way. So the last thing I wanted to say was, what if you look at this whole thing and go, Vern, I'm not even sure a smartphone at all is what I really am wanting here. Do you have any other options? And I've talked to guys that are going, I am so sick and tired of smartphones. I think I'm going to be a true Luddite. And a Luddite is somebody who's pushes back against all sorts of technical advances because, I just have to have what everybody else has. And first of all, I saw this article recently. It was a great article. And it was basically saying, let me find it here. It said, you know what the coolest thing for young people these days is? You go, well, what is the coolest thing for young people these days, Vern? The coolest thing, let me scroll up to the top here. First it was disposable cameras. Then it was low-rise jeans. Now Gen Z's latest vintage obsession is the flip phone. The flip phone has become so popular with millennials. I'm reading from CNN New York. Today, these smaller, lightweight devices, some available for as little as $20 at big box retailers like Walmart and Amazon, are showing up in TikTok videos of young people unboxing them, bedazzling their cases just as earlier generations did, and filming tutorials on achieving a carefree, blurry aesthetic through their low-quality camera. It's the flip phone revolution. So you could be the coolest guy in your friendship group by getting a flip phone. And they might not even know why you have a flip phone. And you could still get phone calls. You can still get text messages, And at parties, here we go, people say, oh my goodness, is that a flip phone? You get to meet some new people. You get to talk, and everybody loves it. There you go. So you could be the coolest guy on the block with a flip phone. Finally, if you don't want to go quite that far, I've read about another type of phone called it's called Techless, and it's on techless.com, techless.com, and they developed a phone which has some smartphone capabilities, but it's much safer than your typical smartphone. So it's going on 22 minutes here, talking about all things smartphones. Let me just say, guys, if we're going to be successful, we got to be 100% in. Number 2, we've got to be honest with ourselves about the things that are tripping us up. And number 3, we got to get creative. No more BS in ourselves. Let's get creative, smart, all in when it comes to creating a smart lives around our smartphones. We'll see you next time.